You know, it's kind of wild how most people have never even heard their names, right? When you look back at the history of World War I, there are thousands of stories of bravery and sacrifice. Yet somehow, these two remarkable women barely appear in textbooks. Their contributions have slipped through the cracks of history, even though what they did was bold, groundbreaking, and unlike anything anyone expected from women of their time. But during World War I, when millions were fighting for their lives, two British women rode into the battlefield on motorcycles. At a time when the world was collapsing into chaos, they made a choice that very few people would ever consider. Instead of staying far behind the lines where it was safer, they pushed forward toward danger, relying on their motorcycles to weave through debris and explosions. They built a medical post so close to the front lines that enemy bullets hit their walls daily. Most medical posts were positioned miles away from the fighting, but theirs stood practically on the doorstep of the war itself. Their tiny aid station, made from a damaged cellar reinforced with sandbags, took constant hits from gunfire. Despite the danger, they kept treating soldier after soldier, knowing that any moment, a shell could land right on top of them. For 4 years, they pulled dying men out of trenches, treated shattered bodies under fire, and refused every order to retreat. Day and night, they performed emergency procedures, while the ground shook beneath their feet. Commanders repeatedly told them to move back for their own safety, but they refused. They knew that if they retreated, countless soldiers would die before reaching help. This is the unbelievable true story of Elsie and Mairi Chisholm, the forgotten motorcycle nurses of World War I. Their story is not fiction, and today, we bring their legacy back to life. Elsie, born in 1884, was a true trailblazer. She lived in an era when women were expected to stay quiet and obedient, yet Elsie never fit into those boundaries. She was confident, adventurous, and unafraid to stand out. She was a trained nurse, fiercely independent, skilled, and sharp-minded. The kind of woman who didn't wait for permission. If she saw a soldier suffering, she stepped in. If she noticed a gap in the system, she filled in. Her independence was her greatest strength. Mairi Chisholm was born 12 years later, in 1896. Though much younger than Elsie, Mairi was equally determined. She embraced new technologies, especially motorcycles, which were still rare and exciting machines. Just 18 when the war began, she was already a talented motorcycle rider, bold, fearless, and determined to help. Her skill made her invaluable for wartime medical work, and her courage kept her going when others hesitated. When World War I erupted in 1914, both women volunteered for the Women's Emergency Corps in London. They expected to support ambulance work far behind the lines, but from the very first days, they saw something that disturbed them deeply. When wounded soldiers were brought in, Elsie noticed a pattern. They weren't dying because their wounds were impossible to treat. They were dying because help arrived too late. Ambulance units had to wait far behind the front lines. Strict military rules prevented medical teams from getting too close. This meant soldiers had to be carried long distances through mud, gunfire, and chaos. By the time a soldier was carried back, it was often already too late. Time was the enemy. So Elsie and Mairi asked a simple question. Why aren't we treating them closer to where they fall? Their question was logical, compassionate, and incredibly bold. But the answer from their superiors was always the same. It's impossible. It's too dangerous. No medical posts can survive that close to the fighting. So they decided to prove everyone wrong. In October 1914, they joined the Flying Ambulance Corps, a Belgian unit that worked closer to the fighting. But even this wasn't enough for them. They wanted to go further. So the two women took matters into their own hands. They rode their motorcycles straight into the ruined town of Pervasic, Belgium, just a short distance from the German lines. The town was shattered, but to them, this was the perfect location, and what they saw there would change their lives forever. Everywhere they looked were signs of suffering. Wounded soldiers collapsed in the mud between the front and the field hospitals. Many of them never made it. These men didn't die instantly. They died slowly, waiting for help that was simply too far away. Elsie and Mairi made a decision that would define them. They would create a first aid post on the front line itself, not even half a kilometer away. They set up shop just 100 meters from the trenches, close enough to hear every single rifle shot. In military terms, that's inside the fight. They found a small, damaged cellar, rebuilt it, reinforced the walls with sandbags, and hung a white sheet painted with a red cross. And then they waited for the first wounded to arrive. They didn't have to wait long at all. Within minutes, stretcher bearers arrived with critically injured men. The women jumped into action, proving immediately why their presence mattered. Their aid post was constantly struck by bullets. The outer walls became riddled with holes. Shells exploded outside day and night. The ground shook, windows shattered, and the air often smelled of chlorine gas. Sleep was rare. Silence was impossible. Danger was constant. Still, the women stayed. They performed emergency procedures normally only done in hospitals. Stitching wounds, stopping bleeding, cleaning out shrapnel, and treating shock, all while hearing the whistle of incoming artillery. And when stretcher bearers couldn't reach the wounded, Elsie and Mairi rode their motorcycles into the battlefield, retrieving injured men from craters and collapsed trenches. To the soldiers, these two women became legends, appearing out of the smoke on motorcycles, pulling men back from the very edge of death. Their courage spread through the trenches. Soldiers spoke of the two fearless women who risked everything to save them. They endured 4 years of hell, 4 years surrounded by death, destruction, and exhaustion. Winter froze everything. Hands stiffened, bandages froze, water turned to ice. Summer brought swarms of flies and rampant infections. Gas attacks were a constant threat. One German gas barrage nearly killed them. Elsie later wrote that the gas clung to the skin like fire. But they continued treating soldiers even while wearing crude gas masks and coughing through the poison. Disease, exhaustion, and bombardment never broke them. By the end of the war, they had treated more than 10,000 soldiers. For their bravery, they received medals from Belgium, from France, and recognition from Britain. But fame, books, movies, nothing. History quietly forgot them. Their names slipped away, overshadowed by the larger narrative of war. When the armistice was signed in 1918, Elsie and Mairi returned home. But the world they returned to was not the one they had left. Elsie lost her son shortly after the war, a heartbreak that stayed with her forever. Mairi lived a quieter life, rarely speaking publicly about her experiences. They lived into old age, long after many of the men they saved had passed on. And though they received honors, neither woman ever became widely known. Their incredible story was simply swallowed by time. But the truth remained. Their courage changed countless lives. They were not soldiers. They were not doctors. Yet they stood closer to danger than most combatants. They had no orders, no protection, and no command structure. Everything they did came from choice, not duty. Just two women on motorcycles, riding into the world's deadliest war to save strangers. History did not give them fame, but the men whose lives they saved never forgot them. To those soldiers, they were angels of the battlefield. This is the true story of Elsie Knocker and Mairi Chisholm, two ordinary women who became extraordinary heroes. Their legacy deserves to be remembered, and today, it finally is. Thanks for watching.